Settle in and slow down. We'll walk through theories about alien technology, grounded in physics and engineering, so you can relax and learn at an easy pace. If you fall asleep, that's okay. You'll still catch the main ideas. Tonight, we are not going to solve the mystery of whether we have ever been visited by beings from other worlds. We are not going to prove or disprove the existence of technology that arrived here from somewhere else, crafted by minds we have never met. Instead, we are going to do something quieter, something that feels appropriate for the stillness of this hour. We are going to look at the stories, the claims, the whispers that have circulated for decades, sometimes centuries, and ask what they mean, not in a courtroom sense, not in a way that demands a verdict, but in a way that lets us wonder, that lets us sit with the possibility that our understanding of technology, of intelligence, of what is possible, might be incomplete. There is something compelling about the idea of alien technology. It sits at the intersection of our deepest curiosities. Are we alone? What is out there beyond the edges of our atmosphere? And if something or someone has come here, what did they bring with them? The notion that somewhere on this planet, hidden in a warehouse or buried beneath the sand, there might be objects that were not made by human hands, objects that operate according to principles we do not yet understand, is both thrilling and unsettling. It challenges everything we think we know about our place in the universe and about the limits of what is technologically possible. Before we begin, I would like to know where you are right now. Are you lying in bed, the room dark except for the faint glow of a screen? Are you sitting by a window, watching the night settle over your city or your town? Wherever you are, whatever brought you here tonight, I am glad you are listening. If this kind of slow exploration, this gentle walk through questions that have no easy answers, is something you enjoy, I would be grateful if you subscribed or left a like. It helps these quiet conversations find others who are searching for the same thing, but there is no pressure, no urgency. We have time. We have all the time we need, so settle in, let your body relax, and let your mind drift where it wants to go. We are going to move slowly tonight, the way you might walk through a museum after hours when all the other visitors have gone home. We are going to look at theories, at claims, at fragments of stories that have been told and retold until they have taken on a life of their own. Some of them may have truth at their core. Others may be nothing more than misunderstandings, wishful thinking, or deliberate fabrications. But all of them, true or not, tell us something about ourselves, about what we hope for and what we fear. The idea that alien technology might exist on Earth is not new. It has been part of human storytelling for as long as we have looked up at the stars and wondered. Ancient texts speak of gods descending from the heavens in vehicles of fire and light. Medieval paintings depict strange objects hovering in the sky above saints and cities. In the modern era, we have photographs, videos, eyewitness accounts, and government reports that acknowledge the existence of phenomena we cannot explain. But acknowledging that something exists and understanding what it is are two very different things. When people talk about alien technology, they are usually talking about one of a few different ideas. The first is that extraterrestrial visitors have been coming to Earth for a long time, perhaps thousands of years, and that they have left behind artifacts, either intentionally or by accident. The second is that in more recent history, perhaps in the last century, we have recovered objects from crashed or landed craft and have been studying them in secret, trying to understand how they work. The third is that some of the technological leaps we have made as a species, leaps that seem to come out of nowhere, might have been influenced or inspired by contact with non-human intelligence. And the fourth, quieter possibility is that what we call alien technology might not be alien at all, but something else entirely, something we do not yet have the framework to understand. Each of these ideas branches into dozens of smaller questions. If ancient visitors left artifacts behind, where are they now? Why have we not found clear, undeniable proof? If governments have recovered alien technology, why keep it secret? What could be gained by hiding such a discovery, and what could be lost by revealing it? If our own technological progress has been influenced by outside contact, how would we even know? And if the phenomena we are observing is not extraterrestrial but something stranger, something that does not fit neatly into the categories we have created, then what are we actually looking at? These are not easy questions, and tonight we are not going to pretend that we have easy answers. What we are going to do is walk through the landscape of these ideas slowly and carefully, looking at what people have claimed, what evidence exists, and what remains frustratingly out of reach. We are going going to consider the possibility that alien technology is real without assuming that every strange story is true. We are going to hold space for skepticism and wonder at the same time, because both are necessary if we are going to think clearly about something this vast and this uncertain. Let us start with the simplest question. What would alien technology even look like? This is harder to answer than it might seem. Our entire understanding of technology is shaped by our own history, by the materials we have available, by the physical laws we have discovered, and by the problems we have needed to solve. We invented the wheel because we needed to move heavy things across distances. We invented the computer because we needed to process information faster than our brains could manage. Every tool, every machine, every system we have created is a response to a specific need within a specific context. But an alien civilization, if one exists, would have a completely different history. They would have evolved on a different world, under different conditions, with different resources and different challenges. Their biology might be utterly unlike ours. They might not have hands or eyes or anything we would recognize as a body. Their understanding of physics might include principles we have not discovered yet, or they might have found ways to manipulate forces we think are fundamental in ways we cannot imagine. Their technology, if we ever encountered it, might not look like technology to us at all. This is one of the central problems with trying to identify alien artifacts. We are looking for something we cannot define. If someone handed you a piece of advanced alien technology, something thousands or millions of years ahead of our current capabilities, would you recognize it? Or would it look like a rock, a piece of metal, a strange crystal, something ordinary that you might walk past without a second glance? Our expectations shape what we see. We look for things that fit our understanding of what technology should be: circuits, wires, moving parts, energy sources. But what if their technology has none of that? What if it operates on principles so different from our own that we would not even know where to begin analyzing it? This question becomes even more complicated when we consider the possibility of technology that is not just advanced, but fundamentally different in kind. There is a concept in science fiction and futurism called indistinguishable magic, the idea that any sufficiently advanced technology would appear to us as something beyond comprehension, something that might as well be magic because we lack the framework to understand how it works. Arthur C. Clarke famously said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and while this is often quoted, it is worth sitting with what it actually means. It means that if the gap between our capabilities and theirs is large enough, we would not see technology. We would see phenomena. We would see effects without visible causes. We would see objects that behave in ways that violate everything we think we know about how the universe works. And this brings us to one of the recurring themes in stories about alien technology: objects that seem to defy physics, craft that move without visible propulsion, that accelerate instantly, that make sharp turns at speeds that should tear any physical object apart, materials that are stronger or lighter than anything we can produce, that respond to touch or thought, that seem to repair themselves or change their properties, energy sources that produce power without fuel, without heat, without any of the byproducts we associate with energy generation. These are the kinds of things people describe when they talk about encounters with what they believe is alien technology. And these are the kinds of things that, if they are real, would force us to reconsider fundamental aspects of our understanding of the physical world. But are they real? That is the question we keep coming back to, and it is a question that does not have a simple answer. Some of the claims are clearly false, the result of hoaxes, misidentifications, or misunderstandings. A light in the sky that someone thinks is a spacecraft turns out to be a planet, a satellite, a weather balloon, or an aircraft. An unusual piece of metal that someone thinks is extraterrestrial turns out to be a mundane industrial alloy. These explanations are not exciting, but they are common, and they remind us that human perception is fallible, that we see what we expect to see, and that the desire to believe in something extraordinary can sometimes override our ability to think critically. But not all claims are so easily dismissed. There are cases that remain unexplained even after serious investigation by credible researchers. There are objects that have been analysed and found to have properties that are difficult to account for. There are reports from trained observers, military pilots, radar operators, people whose jobs require them to accurately identify objects and phenomena, who have seen things that do not fit any conventional explanation. These cases do not prove that alien technology exists, but they do suggest that there are things happening in our skies and perhaps on our planet that we do not fully understand. The challenge is separating the signal from the noise. In any large collection of unusual reports, most will have mundane explanations. But if even a small percentage are genuinely unexplained, if even a handful point towards something truly anomalous, then we have a responsibility to take them seriously. Not to assume that they are evidence of alien visitors, but to acknowledge that they represent gaps in our knowledge, puzzles that deserve careful study rather than dismissal or ridicule. This is the landscape we are entering tonight. A landscape full of claims and counterclaims, of blurry photographs and detailed testimonies, of government secrecy and scientific skepticism, of true believers and determined debunkers. It is a messy, complicated terrain, and we are going to walk through it carefully, without rushing to conclusions, without demanding that everything fit neatly into one narrative or another. We are going to look at ancient mysteries and modern sightings, at theoretical physics and eyewitness accounts, at what governments have said and what they have not said, at the possibility that we are alone and the possibility that we are not. And as we move through these ideas, I want you to notice something. Notice how it feels to sit with uncertainty. We live in a world that constantly demands certainty, that asks us to pick a side, to declare what we believe, to defend our positions. But some questions do not have answers yet, and some mysteries are deeper than our current tools can measure. There is a kind of peace in accepting that, in letting yourself wonder without needing to know, in holding multiple possibilities in your mind at the same time without collapsing them into a single truth. So let us begin. Let us start where so many of these stories start, with the past, with objects and structures that seem out of place in the time periods they come from, with ancient texts that describe things that sound suspiciously like advanced technology, with the persistent question of whether someone or something visited this planet long before we had the capacity to understand what we were seeing. Because if alien technology exists on Earth, if it has been here all along, then perhaps the best place to start looking is not in secret government facilities or recent UFO sightings, but in the deep past, in the stories our ancestors told, in the ruins they left behind, in the artifacts that archaeologists have catalogued but not fully explained. The past is where many people begin their search for evidence of alien contact, and it is where we will begin ours. Not because ancient astronaut theories are necessarily correct, but because they raise interesting questions about how we interpret history, about what we assume is possible, and about the limits of our own perspective. And as we explore these ideas, remember that we are not here to convince you of anything. We are here to wonder together, to think together, to let these questions settle into the quiet space of the evening and see what they reveal. The ancient world is full of marvels, structures that required immense effort to build, knowledge that seems advanced for its time, stories that describe events and beings that do not fit easily into our understanding of history. For as long as people have studied the past, there have been moments when something does not quite add up, when the accepted explanation feels incomplete, when the question arises of whether the people who came before us had help from somewhere or someone we have not accounted for. This is where the idea of ancient alien technology begins, in the gaps between what we know and what we can prove, in the shadows of monuments that still stand after thousands of years, in texts that speak of gods who came from the sky and performed wonders that sound, to modern ears, like descriptions of advanced machines. Let us be clear from the beginning. The vast majority of ancient achievements can be explained by human ingenuity, determination, and the accumulation of knowledge over generations. The pyramids of Egypt, the stone heads of Easter Island, the intricate goldwork of pre-Columbian America, all of these were made by people using the tools and techniques available to them. To suggest otherwise can feel dismissive of the intelligence and capability of our ancestors, as if we cannot imagine them accomplishing great things without outside intervention. But acknowledging this does not mean we should ignore the anomalies, the objects and structures that push the edges of what we think should have been possible. The stories that repeat across cultures despite having no obvious connection. Consider the pyramids. They are the most obvious starting point because they are so iconic, so massive, so precisely constructed. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 4,500 years ago, is aligned almost perfectly with true north. Its base is level to within a few centimeters across a foundation that covers more than 13 acres. The stones, some weighing as much as 70 tons, were quarried, transported, and placed with such accuracy that you cannot fit a blade between many of them. The interior chambers and passages are built with a level of engineering sophistication that speaks to a deep understanding of mathematics and structural principles. Now we know that the Egyptians built the pyramids. We have found the tools they used, the quarries they cut the stone from, the villages where the workers lived. We have texts that describe the organization of labor, the logistics of moving massive blocks, the religious and political importance of these monuments. There is no mystery about who built them, but what continues to fascinate people is how. How did they achieve such precision with the technology available to them? How did they move blocks that weigh as much as a modern semi-truck without wheels, without pulleys as we understand them, without the machinery we would consider essential for such a task? The explanations exist: ramps and sleds and levers and enormous amounts of coordinated human effort. But there is something about the scale and the precision that still sparks wonder, that still makes people ask whether there might be something we are missing. Some researchers have pointed to details that seem unusual: the alignment of the pyramids with certain stars, the incorporation of mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio into their dimensions, the way the structures seem designed to encode astronomical knowledge. Mainstream archaeology often explains these as the result of sophisticated but human knowledge, of careful observation of the heavens and the application of geometry that the Egyptians clearly possessed. But others suggest that such precision, such knowledge, might indicate contact with or influence from a more advanced source. Then there are objects that are harder to explain within the conventional timeline. Take the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. It dates to around the 1st or 2nd century BC, and it is an analog computer, a complex arrangement of gears and dials that was used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses decades in advance. When it was first discovered, no one knew what it was. It took decades of study, modern imaging techniques, and the work of numerous researchers to understand its function. And even now, it is astonishing. There is nothing else like it in the archaeological record until over 1,000 years later. It shows a level of mechanical sophistication that we did not know the ancient Greeks possessed, and it raises the question of what else they might have built that has not survived. The Antikythera mechanism is not evidence of alien technology. It is evidence that the ancient Greeks were more advanced in certain areas than we previously thought. But it is also a reminder that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. If we had not found this one device preserved by chance in the ocean, we would not know it existed. We would have no reason to think that ancient civilizations could build such things. So what else might have existed? What other technologies might have been developed and then lost, either because they were rare, because they were made of perishable materials, or because the knowledge to create them was not widely shared? There are other objects that occupy this strange space between explained and mysterious. Stone spheres in Costa Rica, some weighing several tons, carved with such precision that they are almost perfectly round. How were they made, and why? The accepted explanation is that they were created by the indigenous Dikis culture using simple tools and a great deal of patience, shaping them gradually by pecking and grinding. This is plausible, but it is also impressive, and it leaves open questions about purpose and technique that we may never fully answer. Or consider the Nazca lines in Peru, enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor, some stretching for hundreds of meters, depicting animals, plants, and geometric shapes. They can only be fully appreciated from the air. Why would a culture without flight create images meant to be seen from above? The conventional answer is that they were made for religious purposes, that the gods were imagined to look down from the heavens, and that these lines were offerings or prayers made visible on a grand scale. This makes sense, but it also raises the question of how the Nazca people planned and executed these designs with such accuracy across such distances without being able to see the full picture as they worked. None of these examples require extraterrestrial involvement. All of them can be explained, to varying degrees of satisfaction, by human effort and ingenuity, but they share something in common. They push against the edges of what we expect. They make us reconsider the capabilities of ancient peoples, and for some, they raise the question of whether those capabilities might have been enhanced by contact with something or someone from elsewhere. This question becomes more intriguing when we look at ancient texts. Across cultures, separated by vast distances and time, there are stories that describe beings coming from the sky, beings with great power, beings who brought knowledge or technology, or who intervened in human affairs. In the ancient Sumerian texts, there are references to the Anunnaki, beings described as coming from the heavens, who taught humans agriculture, writing, and law. In the Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, there are descriptions of vimanas, flying machines that could travel great distances, that were used in battles, that sound to modern readers like aircraft or spacecraft. In the Bible, there are passages describing wheels within wheels covered in eyes, pillars of fire, and chariots ascending into the sky. These texts have been interpreted in many ways. Most scholars see them as mythology, as symbolic language used to describe spiritual experiences or natural phenomena that ancient people did not have the vocabulary to explain in literal terms. Thunder and lightning become the weapons of gods. Eclipses become omens. Dreams and visions are interpreted as divine visitations. This is how humans make sense of a world they do not fully understand. We create narratives that fit within our cultural framework, but some researchers read these texts differently. They see descriptions that sound like technology, flying machines with pilots, weapons that cause destruction on a massive scale, beings who descend from the sky and then return to it. If you take these descriptions at face value, if you imagine someone in the ancient world trying to describe something they had never seen before, something beyond their ability to understand, what might they say? How would they explain a craft that flies without wings, a weapon that produces a blinding flash of light, a being wearing a helmet and protective suit? This is the core of the ancient astronaut hypothesis, the idea that some of what we call mythology might be distorted accounts of real events, that advanced visitors came to Earth in the distant past and were interpreted as gods by the people who encountered them. The hypothesis is not new. It was popularized in the late 20th century by writers like Erich von Däniken, whose book Chariots of the Gods presented this idea to a wide audience. The book was controversial, criticized by archaeologists and historians for cherry-picking evidence, for ignoring conventional explanations, and for sometimes misrepresenting facts to fit a predetermined narrative. But even flawed arguments can contain questions worth asking. If we set aside the more extreme claims, if we approach the subject with a degree of skepticism and care, we can still ask whether there is anything in the ancient record that deserves a second look. Not because we are assuming extraterrestrial intervention, but because we are acknowledging that history is incomplete, that our understanding of ancient capabilities is always being revised, and that the line between what is possible and what is not always as clear as we would like it to be. Take the construction techniques used in places like Pumapunku in Bolivia. The stones there are cut and fitted with extraordinary precision, with complex interlocking shapes that would be challenging to produce even with modern tools. The surfaces are flat to within fractions of a millimeter. The corners are sharp and clean. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to the skill of the Tiwanaku civilization, who built the site over 1,000 years ago, using stone tools and abrasives. But the precision is striking, and it is understandable why some people look at it and wonder whether there is more to the story. Or the massive stone blocks at Baalbek in Lebanon, part of a Roman temple complex built on even older foundations. Some of the stones in the foundation weigh over 800 tons. We do not know exactly how they were moved or placed. The Romans were master engineers, and they had techniques for moving heavy loads, but these blocks are at the extreme end of what we think should have been possible with ancient methods. Again, there is no need to invoke extraterrestrial assistance. Human determination and clever engineering can accomplish extraordinary things, but the achievement is still remarkable, and it still invites questions. What we are doing here is walking a line between two extremes. On one side is the assumption that any impressive ancient achievement must be the result of outside help, which underestimates human capability and ignores the evidence we do have of ancient techniques. On the other side is the assumption that we already know everything there is to know about the past, that our current explanations are complete, and that any question that challenges the mainstream narrative is not worth considering. Neither extreme is particularly useful. The truth, as it often is somewhere in the middle. We know a great deal about ancient civilizations. We know they were capable of astonishing feats of engineering, art, and organization. We know they observed the heavens, developed mathematics, built cities, and created works that still inspire awe. But we also know that our knowledge is incomplete. We are constantly finding new sites, new artifacts, new texts that change our understanding of what was possible and when. The past is not a closed book. It is a puzzle with missing pieces, and some of those pieces might reveal things we do not currently expect. So when we look at ancient anomalies, when we consider the possibility of ancient alien technology, what we are really asking is whether there are gaps in the historical record large enough to accommodate something unexpected. Not whether aliens definitely visited, but whether the door is open even a crack. And if it is, what would that mean? How would it change our understanding of history, of technology, of our place in the universe? These are the questions that draw people to this subject. Not because the evidence is overwhelming, but because the questions themselves are profound. Because wondering whether we have ever been visited, whether we have ever been helped or observed or influenced by intelligences not our own, touches something deep in the human psyche. We want to know if we are alone. We want to know if there is more to our story than we have been told. And we want to believe that the universe is full of mystery, that there are still things to discover, that the map is not yet complete. As we continue, we are going to look at more recent claims, at objects and encounters from the modern era, at the technologies that people say they have seen, and the implications if those technologies are real. But it is worth pausing here to appreciate the ancient world, to recognize that whether or not any of these theories are true, the achievements of our ancestors are extraordinary on their own terms. They built wonders, they encoded knowledge. They looked at the stars and asked the same questions we are asking now. And perhaps in some cases, they saw things they could not explain. Perhaps they encountered mysteries that we are still trying to solve. Or perhaps they were simply doing what humans have always done, reaching beyond what seems possible and finding a way to make it real. When the modern era of UFO sightings began in the middle of the 20th century, something shifted. The question of alien technology stopped being purely a matter of ancient speculation and became something immediate, something observable, something that people claimed to be witnessing in real time. Reports came from all over the world. Lights in the sky that moved in ways aircraft should not be able to move. Objects that appeared on radar and then vanished. Encounters described by pilots, by military personnel, by civilians who insisted they had seen something that defied conventional explanation. These accounts have accumulated over decades, and while many have been explained as misidentifications or hoaxes, some remain unexplained. And what makes them particularly interesting is not just that they exist, but what they describe. The modern UFO phenomenon truly entered public consciousness in 1947 when a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 unusual objects flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state. He described their movement as being like saucers skipping across water, and from that description, the term flying saucer was born. In the weeks and months that followed, sightings multiplied. People across the United States and then around the world began reporting similar experiences. Some of these were undoubtedly the result of heightened attention, the power of suggestion causing people to interpret ordinary things as extraordinary, but not all of them were so easily dismissed. What makes the UFO reports compelling, at least some of them, is not the mere existence of lights in the sky. Lights in the sky can be many things: planets, satellites, aircraft, weather phenomena, tricks of perception. What makes certain reports stand out is the behavior that witnesses describe. Objects that accelerate instantly from a standstill to speeds that would be measured in thousands of miles per hour. Objects that make sharp right-angle turns without slowing down. Objects that hover motionless despite strong winds. Objects that seem to respond to the presence of observers, that appear and disappear without following any predictable pattern, that move in ways that violate our understanding of inertia, aerodynamics, and propulsion. If these reports are accurate, and that is a significant if, then they describe technology that operates on principles we do not currently possess. This is what draws attention. Not the existence of unidentified objects, which is almost trivial. There are many things in the sky we might not immediately recognize, but the implications of technology that could perform as described. Because if such technology exists, if there are craft that can move through our atmosphere, or possibly through space, with capabilities far beyond anything we have developed, then someone or something has solved problems that our best scientists and engineers are still struggling with. Let us talk about propulsion. Every vehicle we have ever built, every car, plane, rocket, or spacecraft works according to the same basic principle. You generate thrust by expelling something in one direction, which pushes you in the opposite direction. Cars push against the ground with wheels, planes push air backward with propellers or jet engines, rockets expel hot gas to generate thrust in the vacuum of space. All of these methods require energy. They produce heat and noise, and they are limited by the efficiency of the system and the amount of fuel or power available, and all of them involve trade-offs. To go faster, you need more power. To turn, you need to redirect thrust and deal with the forces involved. There are physical limits to what is possible, but the objects described in many UFO reports do not seem to operate according to these principles. Witnesses describe craft that move without visible means of propulsion, no exhaust, no wings, no obvious engines. Craft that accelerate and decelerate in ways that should produce enormous G-forces, forces that would crush anything inside or tear the craft itself apart. Craft that transition seamlessly from air to water, suggesting some kind of propulsion system that works equally well in different mediums. If these descriptions are accurate, then these objects are not using conventional propulsion. They are doing something else. One possibility that has been discussed by physicists and engineers is some form of field propulsion, a system that manipulates gravitational or electromagnetic fields to create movement without needing to expel mass. This is purely theoretical in our current understanding. We do not know how to manipulate gravity. We have theories, like general relativity, that describe gravity as the curvature of space-time, but we do not have the technology to create or control that curvature. If an advanced civilization had solved this problem, if they had found a way to generate localized gravitational fields or to reduce the effect of gravity on an object, it could explain some of what is reported. A craft that could reduce its own mass or create a bubble of altered space-time around itself, could accelerate without experiencing inertia in the conventional sense. It could turn sharply because it would not be subject to the same forces that limit our vehicles. This sounds like science fiction, and in many ways it is, but it is also worth noting that our own theoretical physics includes concepts that point in this direction. The Alcubierre drive, for instance, is a theoretical model proposed by physicist Miguel Alcubierre that describes how a spacecraft could travel faster than light by contracting space in front of it and expanding space behind it, creating a bubble that moves through space-time without the craft inside actually exceeding the speed of light relative to the space around it. This would require exotic matter with negative energy density, something we have never observed and do not know how to create. But the mathematics work. It is allowed by general relativity. It is theoretically possible, even if it is practically beyond our reach. If a civilization thousands or millions of years more advanced than us had developed such technology, it might look exactly like what witnesses describe: silent movement, instant acceleration. Sharp turns without visible stress on the craft, the ability to move through different environments without changing configuration. These are not impossible things. They are just impossible for us right now, with what we know and what we can build. But impossible for us does not mean impossible. Another recurring feature in UFO reports is the appearance of the objects themselves. Many are described as metallic, smooth, without seams or rivets, without any of the surface detail we associate with manufactured vehicles. Some reports describe surfaces that seem to change, that appear to shimmer or shift in color, that reflect light in unusual ways. Some describe shapes that seem geometrically precise, perfect spheres or discs or triangles, as if they were designed with a level of precision that goes beyond aesthetic preference and into something functional. If these objects are real, the materials they are made from would be of enormous interest. Our current materials science is advanced, but it is still limited. We build things from metals, composites, ceramics, polymers. We make trade-offs between strength and weight, between durability and cost. Every material we use has limits. Metals fatigue, composites delaminate. Everything has a temperature range outside of which it degrades or fails. But if an advanced civilization had developed materials that were stronger, lighter, more resilient, materials that could withstand extreme temperatures and pressures without damage, that could self-repair or adapt to changing conditions, it would represent a revolution in engineering. There have been claims over the years that pieces of unidentified craft have been recovered, that samples of unusual materials are being studied in classified programs. These claims are difficult to verify. Governments have historically been reluctant to share information about such matters, and the line between legitimate secrecy for national security reasons and secrecy to avoid embarrassment or because something genuinely unusual is being hidden is not always clear. But there have been official statements, carefully worded, that acknowledge that materials of unknown origin have been recovered and are being analysed. What would such materials look like? If we found a piece of technology from a civilization far more advanced than ours, would we even recognise it as technology? It might not have circuit boards or wires or mechanical parts. It might be something that looks simple on the surface but has properties that only become apparent when examined at the molecular or atomic level. It might be a composite of elements arranged in ways we have never thought to try, or it might involve elements we have never encountered, isotopes that are rare or unstable in nature but that could be synthesized under the right conditions, or it might be something even stranger. There is a concept in advanced materials science called programmable matter, materials that can change their shape, properties, or function in response to external signals. This is something we are just beginning to explore with things like shape memory alloys and smart materials that can alter their stiffness or conductivity. But imagine taking that concept to its logical extreme. Imagine a material that could be hard as diamond one moment and flexible as rubber the next, that could change its color, its texture, its thermal properties on command. That could reconfigure itself at the molecular level to serve different functions depending on what was needed. Such a material would seem almost alive, and it might be difficult to distinguish from something biological. This brings up another aspect of the technology question. What if alien technology is not purely mechanical? What if it incorporates biological elements? Or what if the distinction between biological and mechanical is not as clear for an advanced civilization as it is for us? We are already moving in this direction with biotechnology, using living cells to produce materials, engineering bacteria to manufacture chemicals, exploring the interface between organic and synthetic systems. An intelligence with millions of years of development might have blurred that line entirely. Their ships, their tools, their systems might be grown rather than built, might incorporate living components that process information, adapt to conditions, heal damage. If such technology exists, if we encountered it, we might not know where to begin analyzing it. It would not fit into our categories. It would not behave according to our expectations, and this might be part of why, if any of these claims are true, progress in understanding has been slow. We are trying to understand something using tools and concepts developed for our own technology, and it may be that those tools are not adequate for the task. There is also the question of energy. Every technology we have ever built requires energy to function. We get energy from chemical reactions, from burning fuel, from nuclear fission, from solar radiation. Each of these sources has limitations. Chemical energy is inefficient and produces waste. Nuclear energy is powerful but difficult to control and produces dangerous byproducts. Solar energy is clean but limited by the availability of sunlight. If an advanced civilization had solved the energy problem, if they had access to a source of power that was compact, clean, and essentially limitless, it would change everything. It would make propulsion systems that seem impossible to us entirely feasible. It would allow them to travel vast distances without carrying enormous amounts of fuel. It would enable technology that we can barely imagine. What might such an energy source be? There are theoretical possibilities. Zero-point energy, the idea that even empty space contains a baseline level of energy that could potentially be extracted, is one. Controlled fusion, the process that powers the sun, is another. We have been trying to achieve sustained fusion for decades, and while we are making progress, we are still not at the point where it is a practical energy source. But a civilization more advanced than ours might have solved this problem long ago. Or they might have found something else entirely, some principle of physics we have not discovered yet, some way of tapping into the fundamental structure of the universe to extract energy. All of this is speculation, of course. We are talking about technology that we have not seen, that we do not know exists, that might not exist at all. But the speculation is not baseless. It is grounded in reports from credible witnesses, in radar data that shows objects behaving in unusual ways, in patterns that repeat across decades and continents. And it is informed by our own understanding of physics, which tells us what might be possible even if we cannot yet achieve it. What we are doing here is taking seriously the idea that some of the things people have reported might be real and asking what the implications would be, not assuming they are real, but not dismissing them out of hand either, because if even a small fraction of these reports point to something genuinely anomalous, if there is technology operating in our skies that does not belong to any nation on Earth, then we are faced with a profound mystery, one that demands investigation rather than ridicule or silence. As we continue, we will look more closely at the specific technologies that might be involved, at the physics that could make them possible, and at what it would mean if we ever gained access to such technology ourselves. But for now, it is enough to recognize that the reports exist, that they describe capabilities we do not have, and that whether or not they are evidence of alien visitors, they represent questions about what is possible, about what might exist beyond the edges of our current knowledge, about what we might one day understand if we keep asking. If we accept for a moment the possibility that some of the objects witnessed moving through our skies are not of human origin, then one of the most pressing questions is how they move. Propulsion is fundamental to any vehicle, any craft, any object that is meant to travel. And the propulsion systems described in UFO reports, if we take the descriptions seriously, operate in ways that challenge everything we currently understand. They accelerate without apparent effort, they change direction without losing speed, they transition from air to water without visible alteration, and they do all of this silently or with only minimal sound. This is not how our vehicles work. This is not how physics as we currently teach it says vehicles should work. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps what we are seeing, if we are seeing anything, is a demonstration that there are other ways, principles we have not yet mastered, or perhaps not even discovered. Let us start with the basics of how we currently move through space. Newton's third law tells us that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. This is why a rocket works. Hot gas is expelled out the back with tremendous force, and that pushes the rocket forward. This is simple and effective, but it has limitations. You need to carry fuel, which adds weight. You need to expel that fuel continuously to maintain thrust, which means you are always losing mass. And the amount of thrust you can generate is limited by how quickly you can burn your fuel and how efficiently you can direct the resulting energy. This is why rockets are enormous, why most of their mass is fuel, and why space travel is so difficult and expensive. Jet engines work on a similar principle, but use air instead of carrying all their oxidizer with them. They compress air, mix it with fuel, ignite it, and expel the expanding gases to create thrust. This is more efficient than a rocket for travel within the atmosphere, but it is still fundamentally limited. You are constrained by the amount of air you can process, by the speed of sound, by the heat generated in the combustion process, and you are always producing noise, the roar of expanding gases and the sonic boom when you exceed the speed of sound. But imagine a propulsion system that does not work by expelling mass. Imagine instead that it manipulates the space around the craft, creating a gradient that causes the craft to move without pushing against anything. This is the concept behind several theoretical propulsion systems that physicists have explored, not because they are easy to build or even because we know they are possible, but because the mathematics suggest they might not be forbidden by the laws of physics as we understand them. The Alcubierre drive, which we mentioned earlier, is one example. It proposes that a spacecraft could contract space in front of it and expand space behind it, effectively surfing on a wave of space-time. The craft itself would not move through space in the conventional sense. Instead, space would move around it. This would allow faster-than-light travel without violating the cosmic speed limit because the craft would never exceed the speed of light relative to the local space-time. It would simply be carried along by the expansion and contraction of space itself. The problem, and it is a significant one, is that this requires exotic matter with negative energy density, something we have never observed and do not know how to create. The amounts required would be enormous. It is theoretically possible, but practically beyond our reach. But what if a more advanced civilization had solved this problem? What if they had found a way to generate the necessary exotic matter? Or what if they had found a workaround, a way to achieve a similar effect using principles we have not thought of? If such technology existed, it would explain many of the observed behaviors of UFOs. The ability to accelerate instantly, because you are not accelerating in the conventional sense, you are moving the space around you. The ability to turn sharply without inertia, because inside the bubble of manipulated space-time, the craft is effectively stationary. The silence, because you are not expelling anything, not burning fuel, not creating shock waves. Another theoretical concept is the electromagnetic drive, or M-drive, a controversial idea that has been proposed and tested with mixed results. The basic concept is that by bouncing microwaves inside a specially shaped cavity, you can create a net thrust without expelling propellant. This would violate the conservation of momentum as we understand it, which is why the idea is controversial. Most physicists are skeptical, and experiments that have claimed to detect thrust have been criticized for not adequately accounting for experimental error or external forces. But the idea persists, and some researchers continue to explore it. If it works, if there is some subtle interaction that we are missing, it could represent a new form of propulsion. And if it does not work, if the conservation of momentum is truly inviolable in this context, then any craft exhibiting similar behavior must be using some other principle entirely. There is also the concept of gravity manipulation. We know that gravity is a fundamental force, that it is the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy. We know from general relativity that massive objects like stars and planets bend space around them, and that this bending is what we perceive as gravity. But we do not know how to create or manipulate that curvature artificially. We can create strong gravitational fields by assembling large amounts of mass, but that is hardly practical for a spacecraft. What we cannot do is generate a gravitational field without mass, or shield an object from gravity, or create a localized gradient that would cause an object to fall in a particular direction, regardless of where the nearest massive body is. But what if it is possible? What if there is a way to manipulate the curvature of space-time using electromagnetic fields or some other mechanism we have not discovered? This is not as far-fetched as it might sound. We know that mass and energy are equivalent, as Einstein showed, and we know that electromagnetic fields carry energy. Perhaps under the right conditions, with the right configuration, it is possible to create a gravitational effect without needing planetary-scale masses. If so, a craft equipped with such a system could effectively create its own gravity, pulling itself in whatever direction it wanted to go. It would not be pushing against anything external. It would be falling, but falling in a direction of its own choosing. This might sound like magic, but it is worth remembering that many things we take for granted today would have seemed like magic to people a few hundred years ago. The idea that you could send your voice across the world instantly, that you could see through solid objects with X-rays, that you could split an atom and release enormous amounts of energy, all of these would have been incomprehensible. Technology advances by discovering principles that were always there but that we had not noticed or understood. Gravity manipulation might be one of those principles. It might be sitting there in the equations waiting for someone clever enough to see it and figure out how to apply it. Then there is the question of how these craft maneuver. Our aircraft turn by redirecting airflow, by angling control surfaces like ailerons and rudders, by changing the thrust vector of their engines. This works, but it is limited. You cannot turn too sharply, or you will stall, you will lose lift, you will subject the craft, and anyone inside, to G-forces that can cause structural failure or physical harm. 9 Gs of sustained acceleration before losing consciousness. Aircraft are designed to stay well below the structural limits that would tear them apart, but even so, the forces involved in high-speed maneuvers are significant. Yet UFO reports describe craft making turns that would involve dozens or even hundreds of Gs if they were experiencing inertia in the conventional sense. An object moving at several thousand miles per hour that makes a right-angle turn without slowing down would generate forces that would turn any conventional craft and anyone inside into a compressed wreck. The fact that the reported objects do not disintegrate, do not slow down, suggests that they are not experiencing those forces. And the only way that is possible is if they are somehow isolated from inertia, if they are inside a bubble of altered physics where the normal rules do not apply. This brings us back to field propulsion and space-time manipulation. If a craft is moving by warping space around it, then the interior of the craft, the space immediately surrounding it, is not accelerating. It is being carried along like a boat on a river. The water is moving, but the boat itself is stationary relative to the water. Similarly, if a craft could create a bubble of flat space-time around itself while manipulating the space-time outside that bubble, it could move at any speed, turn at any angle, and the occupants would feel nothing. They would be in freefall, weightless, experiencing no forces at all. This is speculation, but it is informed speculation. It is based on our understanding of physics, on the equations that describe how the universe works, on the recognition that what is impossible with our current technology might not be impossible in principle. And it is grounded in the reports of trained observers who have seen things that do not fit our current models. These are not random people making wild claims. These are pilots, radar operators, military personnel, people whose jobs require them to accurately identify and track objects. When they say they saw something that moved in ways that should not be possible, we should at least consider the possibility that they are right, and that what they saw represents a technology we do not yet have. There is also the question of how these craft transition between different environments. Some reports describe objects that move from air into water without slowing down, that submerge and then re-emerge, that seem equally at home in either medium. For our vehicles, moving between between air and water is difficult. The physics are different. Air is compressible, water is not. The drag forces are different. The pressures are different. A submarine is not an airplane, and an airplane is not a submarine. You can build vehicles that can do both, but they are compromises, not as good in either environment as a dedicated craft would be. But if a propulsion system works by manipulating fields rather than by pushing against a medium, then the medium does not matter as much. If you are creating a bubble of altered space around your craft, the properties of what is outside that bubble, whether it is air, water, or vacuum, are less relevant. You are not interacting with the medium in the conventional sense. You are moving through it by moving the space itself. This would allow seamless transitions, the kind that witnesses have described. All of this points to a kind of technology that is radically different from what we have, not just a little more advanced, but based on principles that we are only beginning to glimpse in our theoretical physics. It suggests a civilization that has mastered control over gravity, space-time, and possibly the fundamental fields that govern the behavior of matter and energy. And if such technology exists, if it is real, then the implications extend far beyond propulsion. Because the same principles that allow for this kind of movement would also allow for extraordinary energy generation, for materials that can withstand extreme conditions, for capabilities that we have not even begun to imagine. We will explore some of those implications in the sections ahead, but for now, the key point is that propulsion is the foundation. It is what makes everything else possible. And if the reports are accurate, if there are craft moving through our skies that demonstrate capabilities we do not have, then understanding how they move is the first step toward understanding what they are and where they come from. It is a puzzle, a profound and tantalizing puzzle, and whether or not we ever solve it, the act of asking the question, of taking seriously the possibility that there is more to physics than we currently know, is valuable in itself, because that is how progress happens. Not by assuming we have all the answers, but by remaining open to the possibility that we do not. Materials are the foundation of every technology. You can have brilliant ideas, elegant designs, perfect understanding of the principles involved, but if you do not have the materials to build what you imagine, it remains theoretical. Our entire history of technological development can be traced through the materials we learn to use: stone, bronze, iron, steel, each one opening new possibilities, each one allowing us to build things that were impossible before. And as our material science has advanced, we have created composites, ceramics, polymers, alloys with properties tailored to specific needs. But we are still limited. Every material we have has constraints, weaknesses, trade-offs, and if alien technology exists, if there are craft that can perform as reported, then the materials they are made from must be extraordinary in ways that go beyond anything we currently possess. Let us start with strength. Our strongest materials, things like carbon fiber composites, titanium alloys, advanced ceramics, are impressive. They have high strength-to-weight ratios. They can withstand significant stress. They are used in everything from aircraft to spacecraft to medical implants. But they are not perfect. Carbon fiber is strong in tension but can shatter under impact. Titanium is strong and light but difficult to work with. Ceramics can withstand extreme temperatures but are brittle. Every material we use is a compromise, chosen because it is the best available option for a particular application, not because it is ideal. But imagine a material that was stronger than anything we have, that could withstand stresses that would tear our materials apart, that did not have the weaknesses we are used to managing. Imagine something that was as strong as diamond but as flexible as rubber, that could absorb impacts without cracking, that could be shaped into any form without losing its properties. This is not purely science fiction. We are already exploring materials at the nanoscale, things like graphene and carbon nanotubes that have extraordinary properties. Graphene, a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a hexagonal lattice, is incredibly strong, incredibly light, and conducts electricity better than copper. In theory, a sheet of graphene the thickness of plastic wrap could support the weight of an elephant. In practice, we have not yet figured out how to manufacture it at scale or how to assemble it into larger structures without introducing defects that weaken it. But an advanced civilization might have solved these problems. They might have materials that are not just strong, but adaptable, that can change their properties in response to external conditions. We have a hint of this with shape memory alloys, metals that can be deformed and then returned to their original shape when heated. This is a simple example of a material that can be programmed, that has more than one stable configuration. Now imagine taking that concept much further. Imagine a material that could alter its hardness, its conductivity, its transparency, its thermal properties, all on command. That could be a rigid structural component one moment and a flexible membrane the next. That could absorb energy when needed and release it when needed. That could self-repair if damaged, reorganizing at the molecular level to close cracks or replace missing sections. This kind of programmable matter is something we are beginning to research, but we are at the very earliest stages. An advanced civilization with millions of years of development might have perfected it. Their spacecraft, their tools, their entire technological infrastructure might be built from materials that are not static but dynamic, that respond and adapt to changing circumstances. And if such materials exist, if pieces of them have been recovered from crashes or landings, then analysing them would be extraordinarily difficult with our current tools. We would be looking at something that does not fit into our categories, that behaves in ways we do not expect, that might appear simple on the surface, but reveals complexity only when examined at the atomic or subatomic level. There have been claims over the years that unusual materials have been recovered. Some of these claims come from individuals who say they were involved in retrieval operations, who describe objects or debris that seem to be made from unknown alloys or composites. The most famous case is probably the Roswell incident in 1947, where debris was recovered from a ranch in New Mexico. The official explanation has changed over time, first a weather balloon, then a classified surveillance balloon from Project Mogul. But the witnesses, including military personnel who handled the debris, described materials that seemed unusual, thin metal that could not be bent or burned, that returned to its original shape after being crumpled, that was covered in strange markings. These descriptions could be exaggerations, misremembering, or fabrications. Memory is unreliable, especially decades after an event, but they could also be accurate, at least in describing what the witnesses believed they saw. If such materials exist, if they are in the possession of governments or private organisations, then presumably they are being studied. This is where the stories of reverse engineering come in, the idea that we are trying to understand how these materials are made, how they work, and whether we can replicate them. Reverse engineering is a standard practice in technology. You take something apart, study how it is constructed, identify the principles it is based on, and use that knowledge to create your own version or to inspire new designs. But reverse engineering alien technology, if that is what it is, would be orders of magnitude more difficult than reverse engineering a competitor's product. Imagine giving a smartphone to someone from the 18th century and asking them to reverse engineer it. They would have no frame of reference. They would not understand electricity, let alone semiconductors, transistors, digital logic. They could take it apart and they would find intricate components, but they would have no way to understand what those components do or how they work together. They would not even know what questions to ask. That is the scale of the challenge if we are trying to understand technology from a civilization thousands or millions of years ahead of us. We might be able to identify that something is artificial, that it is manufactured rather than natural, but understanding how it works, let alone replicating it, could be beyond our capabilities for a very long time. And yet, there are stories. Whistleblowers, individuals who claim to have worked on classified programs, who say that the United States and other governments have been studying recovered materials for decades. They describe efforts to understand the composition of these materials, to replicate their properties, to integrate insights into our own technology. Some of these claims are vague, offering few specifics. Others are detailed, describing specific programs, facilities, and findings. The challenge is verification. Most of this work, if it exists, would be highly classified. The people who know the truth are not allowed to speak, and those who do speak cannot offer proof without violating security protocols. So we are left with testimony, which is suggestive but not conclusive. One of the more intriguing aspects of these stories is the suggestion that some of our own technological advances might have been influenced by studying recovered materials. The development of semiconductors, integrated circuits, fiber optics, these are innovations that emerged in the mid-20th century, around same time that UFO sightings and reports of recoveries were increasing. Is that a coincidence, or is there a connection? Mainstream history credits these advances to human ingenuity, to the work of researchers and engineers building on earlier discoveries, and that is almost certainly the correct explanation. But the alternative hypothesis that some of these breakthroughs were inspired by examining alien technology is persistent. It is difficult to disprove because the people who would know are not talking, and the evidence, if it exists, is not available for independent examination. What we can say is that materials science has advanced rapidly in the last century. We have gone from relatively simple metals and natural fibers to composites, polymers, and nano-engineered materials with properties that would have seemed magical 100 years ago. Some of that progress is clearly the result of our growing understanding of chemistry and physics. We learned how atoms bond, how crystal structures determine properties, how to manipulate materials at smaller and smaller scales. But if we had additional insights, if we had examples of materials that pushed beyond what we thought was possible, it could have accelerated that process. It could have given us targets to aim for, proofs that certain properties were achievable even if we did not yet know how to achieve them. Then there is the question of what these materials might actually be. If they are exotic alloys, combinations of elements in ratios or configurations we have not tried, then in principle we could replicate them once we understand the composition. But if they involve elements we have never encountered, isotopes that are rare or unstable, or if they are structured at the atomic level in ways that require manufacturing processes we do not have, then replication becomes much harder. And if they involve principles we do not understand, if they are not just materials in the conventional sense, but something that blurs the line between material and technology, between substance and system, then we might not even recognize what we are looking at. Consider for a moment the concept of smart materials. These are materials that can sense and respond to their environment. We have early versions of this, like materials that change color with temperature, or that stiffen under stress, or that generate electricity when deformed. But imagine taking this much further. Imagine a material that contains embedded sensors and processors at the nanoscale, that can monitor its own condition, that can adapt its structure in real time to optimize for current conditions. This would be a material that is also a computer, a sensor network, a control system, all integrated at a level where you cannot separate the material from the technology. It would be, in a sense, alive, not biologically but functionally. It would respond, adapt, and maintain itself. If alien technology incorporates materials like this, then our attempts to analyze them with conventional methods might miss the point entirely. We might look at the chemical composition and see familiar elements, but we would not see the organization, the information encoded in the structure, the active processes that occur at scales too small for us to easily observe. We would be like someone examining a computer chip under a magnifying glass and concluding that it is just a piece of silicon with some metal traces, missing entirely the billions of transistors and the complex logic they implement. All of this is speculative, of course. We do not have confirmed samples of alien materials. We do not have access to the classified programs that might be studying them. What we have are reports, testimony, and the occasional leaked document or photograph that claims to show something unusual. And we have the questions. If such materials exist, why has no one come forward with a sample that can be independently verified? The usual answer is that anything of genuine interest is locked away, controlled, kept out of public view because of national security concerns, or because those in possession do not want to share what they have. This is plausible, but it is also convenient. It makes the claims unfalsifiable because any absence of evidence can be explained by secrecy, and yet secrecy is real. Governments do keep secrets, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not. The Manhattan Project was kept hidden from all but a few people for years. Stealth technology, spy satellites, advanced cryptography, all of these were classified before they were revealed. So the idea that recovered materials, if they exist, would be kept secret is not unreasonable. It is what we would expect. And that makes the situation frustrating because it means we are left with uncertainty, with hints and suggestions, but no definitive proof. What we can do is look at what materials science is telling us is possible and compare that to what is reported. We can ask whether the properties described, extreme strength, adaptability, self-repair, unusual optical or electromagnetic characteristics, are consistent with materials that could exist according to the laws of physics as we understand them. And the answer, generally, is yes. There is nothing in the reports that is impossible in principle. Difficult, beyond our current capabilities, yes, but not impossible, which means that if alien technology exists, if it is made from materials we have not yet learned to create, then then it represents a target, something to aim for in our own development. It shows us what might be achievable, and it challenges us to figure out how to get there. As we continue, we will look at other aspects of this hypothetical technology, at how it might communicate, how it might generate and store energy, and what the broader implications are if any of this is real. But materials are the foundation. They determine what is possible. And if somewhere there are materials that go beyond what we have, that demonstrate properties we are only beginning to imagine, then understanding them, or even just knowing they exist, could shape the future of our own technology in profound ways. Communication is one of the most fundamental activities of intelligent beings. We share information, ideas, warnings, stories. We do it with language, with writing, with symbols and signs. In the modern era, we do it with radio waves, with light pulses in fiber optic cables, with digital signals transmitted through the air and through space. Every method we use is limited by the speed at which information can travel, by the medium through which it moves, by the energy required to send and receive. But if we consider the possibility of contact with an alien intelligence, then we have to ask how they might communicate both among themselves and potentially with us. Would they use methods similar to ours, or would they have developed systems so different that we might not recognize them as communication at all? Let us start with how we communicate over long distances. Radio has been our primary tool for about a century. We encode information as variations in electromagnetic waves and send those waves out through space. Radio travels at the speed of light, which sounds fast, and it is by human standards, but on cosmic scales it is limiting. A message sent to the nearest star would take over 4 years to arrive, and another 4 years for a reply to come back. A conversation with someone on a planet orbiting that star would require decades for a simple exchange. This makes real-time communication impossible beyond our solar system, and even within the solar system, the delays are significant. A message to Mars can take between 3 and 22 minutes depending on where the planets are in their orbits. If an alien civilization wanted to communicate across interstellar distances, they would face the same constraints unless they had found a way around them. One possibility is that they use the same methods we do, but on a much larger scale, with more power, more sophisticated encoding, better signal processing. If they have been broadcasting for thousands or millions of years, there might be a constant stream of signals passing through our region of space, radio waves, or optical signals carrying information that we could detect if we knew what to look for, and if we were listening on the right frequencies. This is the idea behind SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. For decades, radio telescopes have been scanning the sky, looking for signals that do not match natural sources, signals that show the kind of patterns you would expect from an artificial transmission. So far, nothing definitive has been found. There have been interesting signals, anomalies that could not immediately be explained, but none that have been confirmed as extraterrestrial in origin. The most famous is the WOW signal, detected in 1977, a strong narrowband radio signal that lasted for 72 seconds and has never been detected again. It fit the profile of what an artificial signal might look like, but without repetition, without additional information, it remains a mystery. The absence of confirmed signals does not mean there is no one out there. It might mean we are not looking in the right way, or at the right frequencies, or at the right times. Space is vast. The number of possible frequencies is enormous, and an alien civilization might not be broadcasting in a way that we would recognize. They might use methods that are more efficient, more subtle, or simply different from what we expect. Or they might not be broadcasting at all. If they have better ways to communicate, methods that do not involve scattering signals across space for anyone to intercept, they might not use radio except for very specific localized purposes. One possibility that has been explored theoretically is the use of lasers or other focused beams of light. Instead of broadcasting in all directions like a radio transmitter, you aim a narrow beam directly at a target. This requires knowing where the target is, but it is much more efficient. The energy is concentrated, the signal is stronger, and it is harder for anyone else to intercept. If alien civilizations communicate this way, we would not detect their signals unless they were aimed directly at us. We would be in the dark, surrounded by conversations we cannot hear because we are not part of them. There is also the question of encoding. Even if we detected a signal, would we recognize it as communication? Our own signals are complex. A radio transmission carrying music or speech or data looks very different from a simple sine wave. It has structure, patterns, modulation. An intelligent observer analyzing our signals would need to determine that they are artificial, that they carry information, and then they would need to decode that information to understand what it means. This is a challenge, even among humans. Cryptography, the art of encoding messages so that only the intended recipient can read them, has been developed precisely because communication can be intercepted. A well-encrypted message looks like random noise unless you have the key. If we intercepted an alien signal, it might look like noise to us. We might not recognize the patterns, we might not understand the encoding, and even if we did, even if we managed to extract the raw data, we would still need to interpret it. What does it mean? What language is it in? What concepts is it trying to convey? These are not trivial problems. Communication between humans from different cultures can be difficult enough, and we are all the same species, with similar biology and shared evolutionary history. Communication with a truly alien intelligence would be far more challenging, but perhaps they have thought of this. Perhaps any civilization trying to communicate with others would use methods designed to be recognizable, signals that contain built-in clues to their structure and meaning. Mathematicians and scientists have proposed various approaches using prime numbers, simple mathematical relationships, visual representations of fundamental constants. These are concepts that any technological civilization would presumably understand, building blocks that could be used to establish common ground before moving on to more complex ideas. This is optimistic, and it assumes that alien minds think in ways that are at least somewhat similar to ours, that they value the same kinds of patterns and logic. But it is not unreasonable. Mathematics is universal. Physics is universal. If they exist in the same universe we do, they are subject to the same laws, and they would have discovered the same fundamental relationships. Then there is the question of whether communication has already happened, and we simply did not recognize it. This is where we move into more speculative territory, into the claims of contact, abduction, telepathy, ideas that are difficult to evaluate because they lack the kind of evidence that can be objectively analyzed, but they are part of the landscape of this subject, and they deserve consideration even if we approach them with skepticism. Many people who claim to have had close encounters with UFOs or their occupants also describe attempts at communication. Often this is described as telepathic, as thoughts or images transmitted directly into the mind without words or devices. This is, to put it mildly, outside the realm of what we understand about how communication works. We do not know of any mechanism by which thoughts could be transmitted from one brain to another without some kind of physical medium. Our brains generate electromagnetic fields, but they are weak and noisy, and there is no evidence that they carry information in a way that could be picked up and interpreted by another brain. But let us consider the possibility. If an advanced civilization had developed technology that could interact directly with neural activity, that could read patterns of brain activity and translate them into concepts, or that could induce patterns of activity to convey ideas, then from the perspective of the person experiencing it, it might feel like telepathy. It would be a form of communication, but one that bypasses language, that works at the level of meaning rather than symbols. This is speculative, but it is not entirely absurd. We are already developing rudimentary brain-computer interfaces, devices that can read signals from the brain and use them to control prosthetics or computers. We are learning to decode patterns of neural activity and correlate them with thoughts, intentions, and perceptions. It is early days, but the principle is established. An intelligence far ahead of us might have perfected this, might have technology that can establish a direct link between minds, or between a mind and a machine that can then communicate in more conventional ways. If such communication has occurred, it would explain some of the features of contact reports. The difficulty witnesses have in describing what they experienced, the sense that information was conveyed but not in words, the strange mixture of clarity and confusion that often accompanies these accounts. But it would also mean that we are dealing with something so far beyond our current capabilities that verifying it, understanding it, or replicating it is beyond our reach. Then there is the question of what they would want to communicate. If an alien civilization has observed us, if they have been here or are here, what would they want to say? Are they interested in contact, in dialogue, in sharing information? Or are they observing without interfering, studying us the way we might study animals in the wild, with interest but without the desire to communicate? The answer to this might depend on their motivations, their ethics, their level of concern about influencing a less advanced civilization. We have our own concept of the Prime Directive from science fiction, the idea that advanced civilizations should not interfere with less developed ones, that each species should be allowed to evolve and develop on its own. If such a principle is widely held, it might explain why contact, if it has occurred, has been limited, ambiguous, unofficial, or perhaps they have tried to communicate and we have not understood. Perhaps the signals are there, but we are looking in the wrong places or interpreting them incorrectly. Perhaps what we see as random, as natural phenomena, as noise, contains messages that we would recognize if we knew the right way to decode them. This is the idea behind some of the more unconventional SETI proposals, that communication might be embedded in things we do not think of as communication channels, pulsar signals, the cosmic microwave background, the arrangement of matter on large scales. These are speculative ideas, and most scientists consider them unlikely, but they remind us that we are limited by our assumptions, by what we think is possible or reasonable. There is also the possibility that communication is not about exchanging information in the way we think of it, but about something else. Presence, observation, warning. Some researchers have suggested that if alien craft are visiting Earth, their presence itself might be a form of communication, a message that says we are here, we are watching, we are capable of things you are not. This would be a subtle form of contact, one that does not require dialogue, but that still conveys information. It puts us on notice. It makes us aware that we are not alone, and that there are others out there with capabilities we should take seriously. If any of this is true, if there have been attempts at communication, then understanding them, responding to them, or even just recognizing them is one of the great challenges we face. It requires us to think beyond our current frameworks, to imagine forms of communication that do not rely on language or symbols, that might be embedded in technology, behavior, or presence, rather than in signals we can decode. And it requires us to be open to the possibility that we might not understand, that we might be like children trying to grasp a conversation between adults, catching fragments but missing the full meaning. As we move forward, we will explore what it might mean if such communication has occurred, what we might learn from it, and how it might change our understanding of intelligence, technology, and our place in the universe. But for now, the key point is that communication, like every other aspect of this subject, is far more complex than it first appears. It is not just about detecting a signal or decoding a message. It is about bridging the gap between minds that might be fundamentally different, about finding common ground in a universe that is vast, strange, and full of possibilities we are only beginning to imagine. Energy is the currency of the universe. Everything that happens, every movement, every process, every thought requires energy. Life requires energy to grow, to move, to maintain itself. Technology requires energy to function, to move vehicles, to power devices, to communicate across distances. And the amount of energy available, the efficiency with which it can be used, and the methods by which it can be generated and stored determine what is possible for any civilization. For us, energy has always been a limiting factor. We have gone from burning wood to burning coal to burning oil and gas to splitting atoms to capturing sunlight and wind. Each advance has opened new possibilities, but each has also come with costs, inefficiencies, and limitations. If alien technology exists, if there are craft that can travel vast distances, accelerate instantly, and operate for extended periods without refueling, then they must have solved the energy problem in ways we have not. Let us start with what we know about energy. It comes in many forms. Chemical energy stored in the bonds between atoms, released when we burn fuel or metabolize food. Kinetic energy, the energy of motion. Potential energy, stored in position or configuration. Nuclear energy, locked in the nucleus of atoms, released in fission or fusion. Electromagnetic energy, carried by light and other forms of radiation. All of these can be converted from one form to another, but never with perfect efficiency. Some energy is always lost as heat, as friction, as radiation. This is not a flaw in our technology. It is a fundamental law of thermodynamics. Entropy always increases. Order becomes disorder. Energy spreads out. To maintain organization, to power technology, to fight against the natural tendency of things to run down requires a constant input of energy. Our most advanced energy technologies are impressive but still limited. Fossil fuels are energy dense and convenient, but they are finite, they pollute, and they release carbon that is changing our climate. Nuclear fission is powerful, but it produces radioactive waste, and the public is wary of the risks. Fusion, the process that powers the sun, promises to be clean and nearly limitless, but we have not yet managed to sustain it in a way that produces more energy than it consumes. Solar and wind are renewable, but they are diffuse and intermittent, requiring large areas and storage systems to be practical. Batteries have improved, but they are still heavy, limited in capacity, and take time to charge. Every method we have is a trade-off, but imagine a civilization that had moved beyond these trade-offs. Imagine they had access to energy sources that were compact, dense, and effectively unlimited. What might such sources be? One possibility that has been discussed in theoretical physics is zero-point energy, the idea that even empty space, even a vacuum, contains a baseline level of energy due to quantum fluctuations. According to quantum mechanics, particles are constantly popping in and out of existence at the smallest scales, borrowing energy from the vacuum and then paying it back. This is not just theory. The Casimir effect, where two metal plates placed very close together in a vacuum experience a tiny attractive force, is attributed to differences in zero-point energy between the space inside and outside the plates. The effect is real and measurable, but can zero-point energy be extracted and used? This is where things become speculative. Most physicists are skeptical. The energy involved in these fluctuations is tiny, and extracting it without violating thermodynamics is a challenge. Some have argued that it is fundamentally impossible, that trying to extract energy from the vacuum would require putting in more energy than you get out, but others suggest that there might be ways, configurations of fields or materials that could tap into this energy source, that could draw on the underlying fabric of space itself. If such a method exists, if an advanced civilization had discovered it, then they would have access to energy anywhere, anytime, without needing to carry fuel or build vast solar arrays. They could draw power from the vacuum of space itself, effectively giving them an unlimited supply. Another possibility is advanced fusion. We are trying to achieve controlled fusion, to replicate what happens in the core of the sun, where hydrogen atoms are fused into helium, releasing enormous amounts of energy. We have built experimental reactors like tokamaks that use powerful magnetic fields to contain superheated plasma, and we have achieved fusion, but only in brief bursts. And so far, the energy required to maintain the reaction exceeds the energy produced. But progress is being made. Projects like ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, aim to demonstrate sustained fusion that produces more energy than it consumes. If we succeed, it will revolutionize our energy infrastructure. Fusion fuel, isotopes of hydrogen, is abundant. The primary byproduct is helium, which is harmless. There is no carbon emission, no long-lived radioactive waste. An advanced civilization would presumably have perfected fusion long ago. Their reactors might be compact, efficient, and capable of providing enormous amounts of power for spacecraft, cities, or whatever they need to run. They might have moved beyond hydrogen fusion to more advanced cycles, fusing heavier elements, extracting even more energy per reaction. Or they might have found ways to catalyze fusion that do not require the extreme temperatures and pressures we struggle with, making the process easier to control and more practical for a wider range of applications. Then there is antimatter. When matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate each other, converting their entire mass into energy according to Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. This is the most efficient energy release possible, far more efficient than chemical reactions or even nuclear fission and fusion. A single gram of antimatter reacting with a gram of matter would release the energy equivalent of a large nuclear bomb. The problem is that antimatter is rare. We can create it in particle accelerators, but only in tiny amounts, and it takes more energy to produce than we get back. Storing antimatter is also extraordinarily difficult because it annihilates instantly upon contact with normal matter. You would need magnetic or electric fields to contain it, keeping it suspended without touching any physical container. But if these problems could be solved, antimatter would be the ultimate fuel. A spacecraft equipped with even a small amount could travel vast distances, accelerating to a significant fraction of the speed of light. It would make interstellar travel feasible in a way that nothing else currently does. If an alien civilization has mastered antimatter production and storage, it would explain their ability to move across space, to visit multiple star systems, to operate with an energy density that makes our rockets look primitive by comparison. there are also more exotic possibilities, ideas that exist on the edges of theoretical physics and that may or may not be possible. Some researchers have speculated about tapping into higher dimensions, if they exist, or accessing energy from parallel universes or alternate timelines. These ideas are highly speculative, bordering on philosophical rather than scientific, but they are not forbidden by the laws of physics as we understand them. They simply require that the universe is more complex than the three spatial dimensions and one time dimension we experience. If such complexity exists, if an advanced civilization had discovered it, they might have access to energy sources we cannot even conceive of. Energy storage is as important as energy generation. Our batteries are improving, but they are still bulky and limited. Lithium-ion batteries, the current standard, store energy by moving ions between electrodes through an electrolyte. They work well for many applications, but they have limits in energy density, charge speed, lifespan, and safety. We are researching alternatives, solid-state batteries, supercapacitors, flow batteries, but none of these represent a quantum leap in capability. If alien technology includes energy storage systems, they are likely far beyond what we have. Perhaps they use materials that can store energy at the molecular or atomic level with densities orders of magnitude higher than our batteries. Perhaps they store energy in fields, in magnetic or electromagnetic configurations that do not require physical materials. Perhaps they bypass storage entirely, drawing energy continuously from zero-point sources or compact fusion reactors. There have been claims, as with so many aspects of this subject, that recovered alien craft have power systems that we do not understand. Witnesses describe objects with no visible engines, no fuel tanks, no exhaust, no cooling systems. Objects that operate silently for extended periods without any apparent source of energy. If these reports are accurate, they describe technology that either has energy storage of a density we cannot match, or that generates energy in ways we have not discovered. Reverse engineering such systems, if we have access to them, would be one of the great scientific challenges of all time. Because understanding how they work would not just give us a blueprint to copy, it would teach us new principles, new physics, new ways of thinking about energy and matter. The implications of such knowledge would be staggering. If we learned how to generate vast amounts of clean, compact energy, it would change everything. Transportation would be revolutionized. Spacecraft could travel farther and faster. Ground vehicles would not need to refuel. Climate change, driven in large part by our use of fossil fuels, could be addressed. Energy poverty, the lack of access to reliable power that limits development in many parts of the world, could be eliminated. Industries that are currently energy-intensive, like manufacturing, desalination, and agriculture, would become far more efficient. The entire structure of our economy, which is fundamentally based on the availability and cost of energy, would shift. But there is also a darker side. Advanced energy technology could be weaponized. The same principles that allow for compact, powerful energy generation could be used to create weapons of devastating power. This is true of almost any technology. Fire can cook food or burn down forests. Nuclear energy can power cities or level them. If we gained access to alien energy technology, or if we developed similar capabilities on our own, we would face profound ethical and security questions about how to use it, who controls it, and how to prevent it from being misused. This is one reason why, if governments have recovered alien technology, they might be hesitant to reveal it or to share it widely. The potential benefits are enormous, but so are the risks. And the more powerful the technology, the greater the consequences of it falling into the wrong hands. It is a dilemma with no easy answers, and it is one that we would have to face directly if the possibility of alien energy technology were ever confirmed. For now, we can only speculate. We can look at the reports of craft that operate without visible power sources, at the theoretical physics that suggests new ways to generate or access energy, at the slow progress we are making with fusion and other advanced technologies. And we can ask what it would mean if the breakthrough we are striving for has already been achieved by someone else, somewhere else. Whether that knowledge exists in a classified program, locked away and studied in secret, or whether it is still out there, waiting to be discovered, the questions it raises are among the most important we can ask. Because energy is the foundation of everything. And if there is a better way, a cleaner way, a way that opens up possibilities we can barely imagine, then finding it, or learning of it, would not just change technology, it would change the course of our civilization. There is a persistent belief, held by many and dismissed by others, that governments know more about UFOs and alien technology than they have publicly acknowledged. This belief is not without reason. Governments do keep secrets. They classify information for national security, to protect intelligence sources, to maintain strategic advantages. And the history of official responses to UFO sightings has been marked by denial, dismissal, and what many perceive as deliberate obfuscation. But in recent years, there have been shifts. Official statements have become slightly more open. Documents have been declassified. Military personnel have come forward with accounts of encounters that were previously kept quiet. And all of this has fueled renewed speculation about what is known, what is being studied, and what might have been recovered. The modern UFO era, as we mentioned earlier, began in the 1940s. By the early 1950s, the United States government was actively investigating sightings through programs like Project Sign, Project Grudge, and most famously, Project Blue Book. These were official Air Force programs tasked with investigating UFO reports, determining whether they posed a threat to national security, and assessing whether they represented advanced foreign technology. Project Blue Book operated from 1952 to 1969, during which time it investigated thousands of cases. The official conclusion, released in 1970, was that UFOs did not pose a threat, that they had not demonstrated evidence of advanced technology beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge, and that there was no evidence they were extraterrestrial. The project was closed, and the Air Force stated that it would no longer investigate UFO reports, but that conclusion was not universally accepted, even within the military. Some of the investigators involved in Blue Book later claimed that certain cases were not adequately explained, that there was pressure to find conventional explanations, even when the evidence did not support them, and that some of the more compelling cases were removed from the public record or classified. One of the most vocal critics was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who served as the scientific consultant for Blue Book. Early in his involvement, Hynek was skeptical, often providing explanations that debunkers found satisfying and witnesses found insulting, but over time, his views changed. By the end of his work on the project, he had concluded that there were cases that defied conventional explanation, that the phenomenon deserved serious scientific study, and that the Air Force was not handling it appropriately. After Blue Book closed, Hynek founded the Center for UFO Studies and spent the rest of his career advocating for rigorous scientific investigation of UFO reports. The closure of Blue Book did not mean the government stopped paying attention. There have been numerous reports over the years of ongoing classified programs, often conducted under different names or within compartments that were not publicly acknowledged. In 2017, it was revealed that the Pentagon had run a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP, which investigated reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, the term that has largely replaced UFO in official discourse. The program was funded from 2007 to 2012, though some sources suggest it continued in some form after funding officially ended. The revelation of AATIP's existence was significant because it confirmed that the government was, in fact, still studying these phenomena, despite public statements to the contrary. Along with the acknowledgement of AATIP came the release of several videos recorded by Navy pilots showing objects that exhibited unusual behavior. One video, known as the Tic Tac incident, showed an object that appeared to be a smooth, white, oblong shape with no visible wings, exhaust, or propulsion system. The object was observed by multiple pilots and tracked on radar. According to their accounts, it performed maneuvers that should not have been possible, accelerating and changing direction in ways that would subject any conventional aircraft to forces that would tear it apart. The pilots were experienced, the equipment was sophisticated, and yet no one could explain what they had seen. These videos and the accounts that accompanied them sparked renewed public interest and led to official acknowledgement from the Navy that the videos were authentic and that the objects in them were unidentified. In 2020, the Pentagon officially released the videos, and in 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary assessment on UAPs, a report requested by Congress. The report was brief and inconclusive. It acknowledged that there were numerous sightings by military personnel, that most could not be explained with the available data, and that some of the objects observed demonstrated advanced technology, but it stopped short of attributing them to any specific source, extraterrestrial or otherwise. The report called for better data collection, more rigorous analysis, and continued investigation. This represents a shift in official tone. For decades, the standard response to UFO questions was dismissal, ridicule, or silence. Now, there is acknowledgement that something is happening, that it is being observed by credible witnesses using advanced sensors, and that it deserves serious attention. But acknowledgement is not the same as disclosure, and this is where the deeper questions arise. If the government has more information, if there have been recoveries, if there is technology being studied, why is it not being shared? What could justify keeping such information secret for decades? There are several possible answers, and they are not mutually exclusive. One is national security. If recovered technology is being studied in an attempt to understand and replicate it, sharing that information publicly would mean sharing it with adversaries. If another nation were to gain similar knowledge, any strategic advantage would be lost. This logic has governed the classification of military technology throughout history, and it would apply even more strongly to something as potentially transformative as advanced propulsion or energy systems. From this perspective, secrecy is not about hiding the truth from the public. It is about protecting a critical asset. Another possibility is that the information is being kept secret because those in control do not fully understand it, and they do not want to admit that. This is speculative, but it is worth considering. If materials or devices have been recovered, and if decades of study have yielded limited progress, then revealing their existence would mean admitting that there is something we cannot figure out, something that might be evidence of a civilization far more advanced than ours. That is a humbling admission, and it is one that could have geopolitical and psychological consequences. There is also the question of societal impact. The revelation that we are not alone, that we have been visited, that there is technology on Earth that was not made by humans, would be profound. It would challenge religious beliefs, philosophical assumptions, and our understanding of our place in the universe. Some have argued that such a revelation could be destabilizing, that it could cause panic, disillusionment, or a breakdown of social order. This paternalistic view that the public cannot handle the truth has been criticized as condescending and undemocratic, but it has also been a recurring theme in discussions of disclosure, the idea that information is being withheld for our own good. Then there are the claims of individuals who say they have worked on programs related to recovered alien technology. These are whistleblowers, insiders, people who claim to have first-hand knowledge of what is being hidden. Some of their accounts are detailed and specific. They describe facilities, programs, materials, and technologies. They speak of efforts to reverse engineer propulsion systems, to understand the composition of unknown alloys, to study biological samples, and they claim that this work has been ongoing for decades, conducted in secret, hidden even from most government officials and congressional oversight. The challenge with these accounts is verification. Most of the individuals making such claims cannot provide physical evidence without violating security protocols. They offer testimony, and in some cases documents, but documents can be forged, and testimony can be mistaken or fabricated. Yet some of these individuals have impressive credentials. They are former military officers, intelligence personnel, engineers, scientists. They have held security clearances and worked on classified projects. Their accounts are consistent with one another in certain respects, even when the individuals have no known connection. This consistency is suggestive, but it is not proof. One of the more prominent recent claims came from David Grush, a former intelligence official who testified before Congress in 2023. He stated that the United States government has recovered non-human craft, that there are programs working to reverse engineer them, and that this information has been kept from Congress and the public. His testimony was given under oath, and he claimed that he had spoken to numerous individuals involved in these programs. He did not provide physical evidence in the public hearing, citing the classified nature of the information, but he stated that he had provided details to the Inspector General and to congressional investigators in secure settings. Grush's testimony was remarkable, not because it was unprecedented, others have made similar claims, but because of the context. He was a credible witness speaking in an official setting, and his statements were taken seriously by at least some members of Congress. Whether his claims are accurate remains to be determined, but they have added to the pressure for greater transparency and for formal investigation of what is known and what is being done. If even a fraction of what has been claimed is true, If there are programs studying recovered alien technology, then we are faced with profound questions about oversight, accountability, and the right of the public to know. Who decides what information is classified? Who has access to these programs? How are they funded and who oversees them? If congressional representatives are being kept in the dark, as some have claimed, then the programs are operating outside normal democratic processes, which raises serious concerns about governance and the concentration of power. There is also the question of what has been learned. If we have had access to alien technology for decades, what have we discovered? Has it influenced our own technological development? Have insights from reverse engineering efforts led to breakthroughs that we attribute to human ingenuity, but that were actually inspired by studying something not of this world? This is impossible to answer definitively without access to classified information, but it is a question that lingers. Some researchers have pointed to the rapid development of certain technologies in the mid to late 20th century: computers, semiconductors, lasers, fiber optics, and asked whether the pace of innovation suggests outside influence. The mainstream answer is no, that these developments were the result of natural scientific progress, but the question persists. What is clear is that there is a growing demand for transparency. Public opinion polls show that a significant portion of the population believes that the government is not being fully honest about UFOs. Whistleblowers continue to come forward. Congressional hearings have been held. Legislation has been proposed to increase oversight and to protect individuals who come forward with information about classified programs. There is momentum, a sense that the topic is being taken more seriously than it has been in the past. Whether this will lead to meaningful disclosure, to the release of information that confirms or denies the most extraordinary claims, remains to be seen. Governments move slowly, and entrenched interests, whether they are protecting legitimate security concerns or simply protecting the status quo, are not easily overcome. But the conversation has changed. The ridicule that once accompanied this subject has lessened, though it has not disappeared. And there is a recognition, even among skeptics, that the questions are worth asking, that the reports from military personnel deserve investigation, and that dismissing the entire subject out of hand is no longer a tenable position. As we continue, we will look at the broader implications of what it would mean if alien technology is real, if it is being studied, and if we ever gain access to the knowledge it contains. But for now, the question of what governments know, what they are doing, and whether they will ever share it openly is one of the most pressing and frustrating aspects of this entire subject. Because transparency is a value we claim to hold, and yet on this topic it remains elusive. If alien technology exists, if it is as advanced as the reports suggest, then we have to ask what kind of civilization could create it? What does it mean to be thousands, or hundreds of thousands, or millions of years more advanced than we are? This is not just a question of technology, it is a question of scale, of organization, of the trajectory that intelligent life might follow as it develops. We have our own experience as a reference, a little over 10,000 years of civilization, a few hundred years of industrial technology, and a few decades of digital computation. But we are young, and if there are others out there, they might be so far ahead of us that comparing our capabilities to theirs is like comparing a stone tool to a spacecraft. One framework for thinking about advanced civilizations is the Kardashev scale, proposed by the Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev in 1964. He suggested classifying civilizations based on the amount of energy they can access and use. A Type 1 civilization can harness all the energy available on its home planet, capturing the full output of its star as it reaches the planet, controlling weather, geological processes, and utilizing every resource available. A Type 2 civilization can harness the entire energy output of its star, building structures like a Dyson sphere, a hypothetical megastructure that surrounds a star to capture its energy. A Type 3 civilization can harness the energy of an entire galaxy, coordinating across billions of star systems, managing energy on a scale that is difficult for us to comprehend. By Kardashev's scale, we are not even a Type 1 civilization yet. We are sometimes described as a Type 0.7, able to use some of the energy on our planet, but far from mastering it. Our energy use is a tiny fraction of what the Earth receives from the Sun, and we still rely heavily on fossil fuels, which are stored energy from ancient sunlight, but are a limited and polluting resource. Moving to Type 1 would require us to transition to renewable energy, to master fusion, to build infrastructure that can capture and distribute energy on a planetary scale. This is achievable in principle, but it will take time, perhaps centuries, and it will require coordination, investment, and technological progress. A civilization that is even Type 2 would be so far beyond us that their capabilities would seem magical. They would have access to energy billions of times greater than what we use. They could travel across their solar system as easily as we travel across a city. They could build structures that dwarf planets, manipulate stars, and potentially even alter the fabric of space itself. And if such a civilization visited us, their technology would be incomprehensible. We would not see machines, we would see phenomena, effects without apparent causes, objects that behave in ways that violate our understanding of physics because they are operating according to principles that only become accessible at much higher energy levels. But the Kardashev scale is only one way to think about advancement. It focuses on energy, but there are other measures. Information processing, the ability to store, transmit, and manipulate data. Control over matter, the ability to engineer materials and structures at the atomic or subatomic level. Understanding of fundamental physics, knowledge of how the universe works at the deepest levels. Longevity, both of individuals, if they have overcome biological aging, and of the civilization itself, whether they can sustain themselves over millions or billions of years. And there are dimensions we might not even think of, ways of measuring progress that are specific to their values, their history, their environment. An advanced civilization might also have moved beyond biological existence. If they have mastered technology to the point where they can transfer consciousness into artificial substrates, into machines or virtual environments, they might not need planets at all. They might exist as pure information distributed across networks, inhabiting forms that are created as needed and discarded when no longer useful. This is the idea of a post-biological civilization, one that has transcended the limitations of flesh and bone. For such a civilization, the concepts of lifespan, population, even individual identity might be radically different from ours, and their technology would reflect that, designed not for biological beings, but for something else entirely. If we encountered such a civilization, or their technology, we might not recognize it as alive or intelligent. We might see autonomous systems, machines that operate without obvious control, objects that seem more like living things than like the technology we are familiar with. This blurring of the line between biological and artificial, between organism and machine, is something we are beginning to explore ourselves with artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and the integration of digital systems into our lives. But we are at the earliest stages. An advanced civilization might have reached a point where the distinction no longer means anything. There is also the question of time. How long does a technological civilization last? We have been in our current state for a very short period, and we are already facing existential challenges, climate change, nuclear weapons, ecological collapse, the potential misuse of artificial intelligence. If we survive these challenges, if we make it through what some call the Great Filter, the dangerous transition from a young civilization to a mature one, then we might go on to last for millions or billions of years. But if we do not, if we destroy ourselves or regress, then our chapter will be brief. The same is true for any other civilization. They might rise, flourish for a time, and then vanish, either through catastrophe or by choice. If alien civilizations do exist, and if some of them are visiting us or have visited us, then they are presumably the ones that have survived, that have passed through their own critical periods and found a way to endure. What can we learn from that? What does it take to be a long-lived civilization? Stability, certainly. The ability to manage resources, to avoid self-destruction, to adapt to changing conditions, but also perhaps a certain philosophy, a way of thinking about existence, about growth, about the balance between progress and sustainability. If we ever make contact, if we ever have the chance to ask, one of the most valuable questions we could pose is how they survived, what choices they made, what they learned. There is also the possibility of multiple civilizations, of a galactic community, if such a thing exists. If intelligent life is common, if there are thousands or millions of civilizations in our galaxy alone, then they might interact with one another, forming networks, alliances, systems of trade or communication. This is the premise of much science fiction, and it is not implausible. If interstellar travel is possible, if civilizations can visit one another, then over time, relationships would develop. There might be young civilizations like us, older ones that serve as mentors or observers, and ancient ones that have seen entire cycles of galactic history. But there might also be isolation. Space is vast, and even if there are many civilizations, they might be so far apart that contact is rare or impossible. The distances between stars are measured in light years, and even traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light would take decades or centuries to reach the nearest systems. If civilizations are separated by hundreds or thousands of light years, they might be aware of one another's existence through radio signals or other transmissions, but direct contact might never occur. They would be like islands in an ocean, each one developing independently, aware that others exist but unable to visit or communicate in real time. This is sometimes called the Fermi paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously asked, "Where is everybody?" If the universe is so vast, if there are so many stars and planets, why have we not seen clear evidence of other civilizations? There are many proposed answers. Perhaps life is rarer than we think. Perhaps technological civilizations do not last long. Perhaps they exist but are too far away or too different for us to recognize. Perhaps they are here, observing us, but choosing not to make contact. Or perhaps we simply have not been looking long enough or in the right ways. The question of alien technology, if it exists, fits into this broader question of where everyone is. If there are craft visiting Earth, if there are objects in our skies that demonstrate capabilities far beyond ours, then that would answer the Fermi paradox, at least in part. It would say, they are here, or at least they have been here. It would mean that contact has occurred, even if it has not taken the form we expected, and even if it has not been officially acknowledged. But it would also raise new questions. Why are they here? What do they want? Are they observing, interfering, or simply passing through? And if they are advanced enough to visit us, what does that say about the likelihood that there are others, that the galaxy is populated, that we are part of a larger community that we have not yet been invited to join, or that we have not yet discovered? These are questions that blend science, philosophy, and speculation. They are questions we cannot answer with certainty. Not yet, but they are worth asking. Because thinking about advanced civilizations, about what they might be capable of, about what their presence would mean, forces us to think about our own trajectory, about where we are going, about what we might become. It challenges us to imagine possibilities beyond our current limitations, to recognize that we are at a very early stage of development, and that there is so much more that could be, both for us and for whoever else is out there. As we move toward the conclusion of this exploration, we will consider what it means to live with these questions, to sit with uncertainty, and to recognize that whether or not alien technology exists, the act of wondering, of asking, of looking beyond ourselves, is part of what makes us human. So here we are, at the end of this long, quiet walk through possibilities, through claims and theories and fragments of evidence that hint at something but never quite resolve into certainty. We have looked at ancient structures and modern sightings, at propulsion systems and materials, at energy and communication, at government secrecy and the physics of advanced civilizations. And through it all, one thing has remained constant. The questions persist, the uncertainty remains, and perhaps that is as it should be. Living with uncertainty is not easy. We are wired to seek patterns, to find explanations, to bring order to chaos. When we encounter something we do not understand, we feel compelled to categorize it, to fit it into a framework that makes sense, to decide whether it is real or not, important or not, threatening or not. But some questions do not yield to this approach. Some mysteries are too large, too complex, or too hidden for us to resolve with the tools and information we currently have, and the question of alien technology, of whether it exists on Earth, of whether we have been visited or observed or influenced by intelligences not our own, is one of those mysteries. If the technology is real, if there are objects that operate according to principles we do not understand, then the implications are staggering. It would mean we are not alone, that we are part of a larger cosmos populated by minds and civilizations that have solved problems we are still struggling with. It would mean that the universe is more interesting, more complex, and more interconnected than we have allowed ourselves to believe. It would open the door to new knowledge, to advancements that could transform our civilization, to perspectives that could change how we see ourselves and our place in the universe. But it would also be humbling. To know that there are others far ahead of us, that we are not the pinnacle of intelligence or technology, that we are in fact newcomers to a stage that has been occupied by others for much longer, would challenge our sense of importance, our belief that we are special. It would force us to reconsider our assumptions, to recognize that what we think of as the limits of the possible might only be the limits of our current understanding. On the other hand, if the technology is not real, if the sightings can all be explained, if the claims of recovered craft are false or exaggerated, then we are left with a different kind of wonder. The wonder of a universe that, as far as we know, has produced only us, at least in this corner of space and time. The wonder of a cosmos so vast that even if life is common, we may never encounter it, separated by distances that are too great to bridge. And the wonder of human imagination, of our ability to see patterns, to tell stories, to believe in possibilities that go beyond the evidence, because we are creatures who need meaning, who crave connection, who look at the stars and ask, are we alone? Both of these possibilities, the existence of alien technology and its absence, lead to profound reflections, and living in the space between them, in the uncertainty, is where we find ourselves now. We have reports from credible witnesses, but no physical proof that has been independently verified. We have official acknowledgements that something unidentified is being observed, but no definitive attribution. We have theories grounded in physics that suggest how advanced technology might work, but no confirmation that such technology exists. And we have testimony from individuals who claim to have seen, handled, or worked on recovered materials, but no access to those materials for public examination. This state of affairs is frustrating. It invites speculation, and speculation without evidence can lead to wild theories, to claims that outpace the facts, to a blurring of the line between what is possible and what is proven. But it also invites inquiry, and inquiry is valuable even when it does not lead to immediate answers, because the act of asking, of investigating, of refusing to dismiss questions simply because they are difficult or uncomfortable is how progress happens. Science is not a collection of facts. It is a process, a method for testing ideas, for gathering evidence, for building models of how the world works. And when science encounters something it cannot explain, the proper response is not to ignore it or to declare it impossible, but to investigate further, to gather better data, to refine the questions. This is what is beginning to happen with the UFO phenomenon, or UAPs as they are now officially called. There is more openness, more willingness to study the reports seriously, more recognition that dismissing them without investigation is not a scientific approach. But there is also a need for rigor, for careful evaluation of evidence, for distinguishing between what is observed and what is interpreted, between what is possible and what is proven. Not every light in the sky is a spacecraft. Not every unusual material is of extraterrestrial origin. Not every claim from a whistleblower is accurate. The challenge is to take the subject seriously without abandoning critical thinking, to remain open to possibilities without accepting every claim uncritically. For those of us who are not scientists, who do not have access to classified information, who are not involved in research or government programs, what can we do? We can stay curious. We can read, learn, and think carefully about what we encounter. We can support efforts to investigate these phenomena rigorously and transparently. We can demand accountability from our governments, asking that information be shared when it is safe and appropriate to do so, and we can live with the uncertainty, recognizing that not knowing is not the same as there being nothing to know. There is a kind of peace that comes with accepting uncertainty. It frees us from the need to defend a position, to be right, to have all the answers. It allows us to hold multiple possibilities in our minds at once, to say, I do not know, but I am interested, and I will keep paying attention. This is not the same as being indifferent. It is about being comfortable with ambiguity, with complexity, with the recognition that some questions take a long time to answer, and some may never be answered in our lifetimes. And perhaps that is okay. Perhaps the value of this subject is not in the answers, but in the questions themselves, in the way they make us think about who we are, where we come from, and where we might be going. in the way they connect us to the larger universe, reminding us that we are part of something much bigger than ourselves, in the way they inspire us to keep looking, keep wondering, keep reaching beyond what we know toward what we might one day understand. If alien technology is real, then we live in a universe far stranger and more wondrous than most of us imagine, a universe where other minds have looked at the same stars we see, asked the same questions we ask, and found answers that allowed them to cross the distances between worlds. A universe where contact is possible, where knowledge can be shared, where we are not alone in our struggle to understand existence. And if it is not real, if we are alone or effectively alone because the distances are too vast to bridge, then we live in a universe that is no less wondrous, but in a different way. A universe where the emergence of intelligence, of consciousness, of the ability to ask these questions is rare and precious. A universe where we carry the responsibility of being, as far as we know, the only ones who can look back at it and try to make sense of what we see. Either way, the questions matter, the search matters, and the willingness to sit with uncertainty, to remain open, to keep wondering, matters, because that is what it means to be human, to look beyond the immediate, beyond the known, and to ask what else is out there, what else is possible, what else we might become. So as you drift off tonight, as your thoughts slow and your breathing deepens, let these questions settle gently into the background. Let them remind you that the universe is vast, that we have only just begun to explore it, and that there is so much we do not yet understand. Let them inspire a sense of humility, of wonder, of connection to something larger than yourself. And let them carry you into sleep, into that other kind of deep time, where the mind wanders freely and the boundaries between what is known and what is imagined dissolve into dreams. Whether alien technology exists or not, whether we ever find proof or live forever with the questions, the universe remains a place of mystery and possibility, and that perhaps is enough. Not an ending, but an opening. Not an answer, but an invitation to keep looking, keep wondering, and keep reaching toward the unknown. Sleep well, traveler. The mysteries will still be here when you wake.